My name is Gina, and I'm a young adult librarian. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that we are monitoring the comment section for Twitter and Facebook, as well as the YouTube chat. So if you have a question that you'd like to share, please submit it there. And I also want to remind everyone that this conversation is being recorded and live streamed to YouTube. All right, with those housekeeping things out of the way, let's get started. Today, we are very fortunate to get to spend some time with award-winning young adult author, Chris Crutcher. Chris is a local Spokane author and was raised in Idaho and who graduated from Eastern Washington University. A few of his most recent books include Period 8 and Loser's Bracket. Thank you so much, Chris, for taking the time to meet with and share this conversation with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Believe me, boy, you can't do this. And we talked about this a little bit earlier. You can't do this without kind of feeling for young adults, for teenagers, because this is unprecedented. In a week, I'll be 74 years old, and I haven't experienced anything like this. And I mean, you know, when I was a senior in high school, President Kennedy was killed, and it rocked the world. I mean, nobody knew what to do. It rocked the world. It had the same kind of sense to it that 9/11 had. You know, the Columbine shootings, just all these kind of things that just threw you off. But this is so different because instead of an explosion, it's like an implosion. It's like all of a sudden, I mean, you're in the last quarter of school this year and school closes down, and you still have to go to school, but you've got to do it on the computer. And all of a sudden you can't be with your friends, or you can't, I mean, there's so many things that can't happen. All the end of the year, the athletics, and the end of the year, the prom and the graduation and all those kind of things, the markers are gone. And I thought about that, and I thought, my God, I graduated high school in 1964. So that's a long time ago. I mean, not very many people watching this were around then. In fact, not many people watching this will be even as old as some of my books. But I think about it, and I think the isolation would have been so much greater then, because you wouldn't have the internet, you wouldn't be able to Zoom, you wouldn't be able to FaceTime or do any of that kind of thing. But there's still the sense that gets me now, I think, and really tickles my writer's mind, is nobody knows how this goes. Nobody knows how this ends. I mean, this has kind of a Stephen King quality to it. You know, it's like end of time stuff. It's The Stand, right? Or,
right.
I mean, this is worse than a clown that lives under the grate and eats little kids. Partly because you don't know where it's going. And I've talked with a lot of writing classes, creative writing classes, and library things where kids who want to write, young people who want to write stories and some fiction and some nonfiction. And I think, as crazy a time as this is, it's a really, really rich time for story. Because number one, we don't know how this is going to end. We know it's going to be over. It will be over. I mean, there was a pandemic 100 years ago and it got over. But nobody alive now was alive then, or very few people. And the storyteller, the fiction writer, gets to basically choose his or her own ending to something like this. And one of the things that I've been saying to a lot of people who want to write, and I'm doing it myself, because you never get past learning about story. And you want to write something. If you're a writer, you want to write down something every day of this time, because down the line, when you sit down to put a book together or to start a series of essays or things like that, the things that you're thinking right now are going to be really important, because some of them, number one, some of them will be spot on. Some of them will be just exactly right. Some of them will be wild. And the cool thing about writing fiction is both of those things are really valuable. because wild is just as invaluable in fiction as being able to predict. And I look at a book that I wrote probably close to 20 years ago. It's a book called Whale Talk. And
I just finished that book, actually.
Oh, you did?
Yes.
Well, so this might resonate. I wrote it, like I said, about 20 years ago. And it's a real personal book because there are a number of things that happen in it, and some of them are god awful. But they're things that I either experienced or knew about with close friends and things like that in my life. But the kind of the heart and soul of the story is about racism. It's about a kid living in this part of the country back when the Hayden Lake neo-Nazis were going full blast. And that isn't even, they didn't lose that many years ago when you consider that those guys were over there when I was in college. And they were here this whole time. And live war games and swastikas on bald heads and all kinds of criminal stuff and all that going on. And the level of hate that came out of that place. I remember I had lived here. I went to Eastern and I graduated from Eastern in 68, went back and got a teaching credential. But then I was in California, in the Bay Area in California for about 10 years. And when I came back up here, I remembered those guys, but probably within a month, I'm in a new place and I hear a bang on the door and I go out there and these guys are delivering a newspaper that has on the front of it, and it's just, it's very primitive kind of newspaper. It's like they put it off on kind of a mimeograph. But the front page is a picture of an ape and a black man standing in exactly the same position. And they were doing their thing about how Black Americans, Black anybody, aren't really humans. And I ran down the road. I was chasing the guy down the road. And he was in the car and I was running, so I didn't. But it rocked me because I had been in Oakland for the last 10 years. And Oakland is probably one of the most diverse cities in the country. And I forgot that I grew up in Lily White, Cascade, Idaho, and that this part of the country had been far less integrated in terms ethnically and racially in my time here. When I was at Eastern, there were 2 African-American students in the entire university, and it was a college then, and they were friends. They had come from Lewis and Clark High School, and boy, they were careful. Mm-hmm. And you had no idea what they were going through because they were smart and they were funny and they were keeping themselves out of trouble because they realized, and we didn't, the kind of trouble you could get in this part of the country. So when I wrote Whale Talk, the main character in Whale Talk is a mixed race. He's part Japanese, part black, part white, orphan. A kid who goes into foster care after he's been around for 2 years, not being taken care of by a mom with a drug addicted mom, and so he's a real edgy guy, and he really represents one of my. He looks a lot and talks a lot like one of my stepsons. So his voice was a real easy one for me to get. Because he didn't have the tough time. Jason didn't have the tough time that TJ had, but he had some knowledge that I wouldn't experience first, and he was funny. And so that voice was one. And as a writer, you're always looking for that voice and the voice that really works. And all I had to do was just kind of close my eyes and listen to him. And at the same time, I was writing the story, and I was probably about 7 or 8 chapters into it, so maybe a third. And I was working at the mental health center at the time. I was working in child abuse and neglect projects, and I was a therapist, and I worked a lot with. My expertise was like teenagers and adults, so I was working with a lot of people, abusive parents, and then kids who had been through a lot. teenagers. And we got a call one day. We had this magical play therapist, and the magical play therapist was a woman who, for 40 years, in fact, she just barely retired, for 40 years worked with 6 and unders that were badly abused. And so we had a kind of a wraparound program where I would work with the adults and the teenagers, and she would work with these Head Start kids. She was out at Head Start. So when Head Start called us up and they knew about this child abuse project, and they said, we've got 17 kids out here who are foster kids. And if you would bring us a therapist to work with the adults, because the moms, mostly moms, but moms and dads that are still involved, they come out to Head Start. So you could work with the parents, we can work with the kids, throw it all together. We can do the intellectual piece and we can do the psychological piece together. Brilliant idea. Supervisor calls me up and said, okay, you're going to go out there and work with the parents. And then Carol will be working with these kids. And Carol she really was magical. And she still is. I mean, she was somebody who could, when you watched her work with little kids in play therapy, she would just disappear. And all you could see was the way the world looked through the eyes of that kid. So I get out there and I don't know really what to do, because I know how to work. I can do groups with the parents. I can do anger management, and I can do couples groups and stuff with the parents. But you're out there for about 3.5, 4 hours. So you're going to be working with the kids at some point. So I went over and I said, what should I do? I don't know anything about play therapy or therapy with kids. I can eat with them and I can read them stories. And she said, well, the kids who have been physically abused, statistically, probably it was a man. So when you get out there, they're not going to know whether you're a good guy or a bad guy. And let them come to you. Don't judge, don't scold, just reflect, And I thought, she just told me I don't have to do anything. This might be my favorite job, right? So I get out there in the first day, and I really did feel like I was out of my element until I could, sit with the parents and do some group work and things like that. But they have breakfast out there, and there's all these things going on. Well, I noticed that I had really come back into Caucasian America, because as I'm looking at the classroom, there are 17 kids, 16 are white, and one little girl is mixed race. And nobody knew who her dad was, because her mom wouldn't tell anybody who her dad was, because if her dad knew that he had a kid, he would have saved her. He was a black airman out at the base, and he never was even told that she was pregnant. She gets with this viciously racist carnival worker who hated this little girl. And I mean, the N-word came out of his mouth like a and a. He was just on her all the time. And they had 2 sons in kind of quick succession. So she had these 2 younger brothers, and they got everything first. When dinner time came, they ate, and when what was left, she got.
That's so sad.
It really was crazy. I mean, they would play with the toys till they were broken, and she played with the broken toys. And she was the oldest kid. I mean, she was 2 years older than the one boy. And you couldn't see any of that. I mean, she was just this delightful little girl. And she would come into the room, and kids just gravitated toward her. And she was social. And it would kill you, because if you saw her with her and her mother without stepdad there, it was like they were joined at the heart. I mean, she'd have stepped in front of the truck for this kid, but she wouldn't get rid of this guy for this kid. So the first time that I'm kind of struck by her, moved by her, she's over by the sink, and it's kind of a deep sink, and there's a brush, there's a big bar of that industrial soap, and she gets them wet. And then she starts just scrubbing on her arms with the brush, and it looked like it hurt. And I said to Carol, what's she doing? And Carol said, well, she thinks if she can scrub the color off, that her stepdad will love her. And I said, well, why didn't somebody tell her her stepdad's a jerk and she's the cool one, and let's get on with it? And Carol said, because she didn't go home with you. If she goes home with him. And what she's doing right now is showing us what her life is like. When we're done with this, she'll know she's the good guy and he's not. But we have to get there. You don't go tell a kid like that everything's going to be okay, because you don't know if it's going to be okay, and you could just become one more adult liar. So then I watched him do the therapy, and you could watch through one-way glass. And she'd go in, and we had a playroom that just had every toy you can think of. I mean, we had Legos, and we had dolls and superhero. I mean, you name the toy, we had the toy. And she would go around the room, and she just ignored everything else except she'd pick up dolls. And she'd get this big armload of dolls and dump them into it was kind of an appliance box. So it was an old refrigerator box. And then she'd go down on her knees, she'd reach in, and she'd pull out a doll. Now, if it was a light colored doll, she treated it like her little brothers got treated. She sang to it, and she rocked it, and she put it in a little crib. And if it was a darker colored doll, she treated it like she got treated. She started screaming at it and calling it names, throwing it across the room. And when she's finished, she's sweating. I mean, she's just in a heap. And you watch Carol with her, and when the little girl's mad and furious, Carol's mad and furious right with her. And when she's broken and sad, Carol's broken and sad, right? It's just, just she's reflecting, saying, yeah, anybody would feel like that. Well, it was pretty hard to watch.
I bet.
When I first walked in there, and she's scrubbing on her arms, and I don't know any of this yet, she looks up and she sees me, and she dries off her arm and walks over and just plants herself in front of me. And we're looking at each other, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So I try to step around her, and she steps in front of me. And I go the other way, and she steps in front of me. And we do this little dance, and she's not going to let me go by. So we just stand there looking at each other. She gets this big smile on her face and pick me up.
Oh, that's sweet.
Cannot not pick her up.
Oh, that's sweet.
So I pick her up. She's got a great big smile on her face. Gets even bigger. And then she drops the F-bomb and a B-bomb right at me to see what I'm going to do. And I went. And I thought, okay, I'm not supposed to scold her. I'm not supposed to. And I didn't know, out of desperation, I did what you did. I laughed. When I laughed, she just threw her arms around my neck and started giggling. And I thought, God, this play therapy is easy. All you have to do is say bad words to little kids.
And laugh about it.
Yeah, laugh about it.
Hey, Chris, we got a question.
Sure.
From Eva. She's asking, did you want to be a writer when you were a kid?
I wanted to be I wanted to be a comedian. I wanted to be heard, and I was an extrovert. I didn't want to be a writer because I was way ADD, and I couldn't concentrate. I just couldn't pull it off. I was really good with short stuff. I was really good with, and I was pretty funny. At least I thought I was. Most of my teachers didn't, but I had enough of my classmates thought I was. But I didn't have the patience. And I would get, if I tried to write, I knew I was good with words, but if I tried to write anything of any length, my mind bounced around so much that I couldn't, it wouldn't pull together. And I didn't realize that, it would have been diagnosable as attention deficit, but they didn't have that designation then. And I just thought I was an idiot. And that I wasn't, I worked sometimes to be a C student. And I didn't realize that I had to manage my mind. And when I figured that out, and I figured out that if I did a lot of physical activity, if I ran, or if I could tire myself out, or if I swam, anything that I could do that would take some of the edge off everything, I could think better. So when I figured that out, actually after I got out of college, I figured out that I could tell a story if I told the story to myself on the run and then came back and wrote it down.
Ah,
So I couldn't have articulated this. I wanted the connection of sharing my creativity and getting response to it and reading other people's or music. I loved music. I loved, there were any kind of creative endeavor. And I wanted to share it. I wanted to get it back as much as I gave it. So I probably did want to be a writer, but I couldn't have called it that until I was probably 25 or 30. And then I really wanted to. I mean, I was desperate to be a writer by the time I was 30. And I didn't publish a book until I was 35. I mean, it took me that long to, number one, carve out the amount of time that it takes to write a book and teach myself how to do it.
Yeah, well, and Eva is also wondering how you learned how to write, how you combated the distraction and getting all that out. Did you use sticky notes or outlines?
I couldn't outline. The outline was just, I was doomed for an outliner, because if I started outlining, I'd write 2 sentences and then I'd think of something else and off I'd go. But what I started doing was what I didn't know, and I wish I had, what I didn't know and I had to find out was that when your attention deficit, your mind bounces around until you run into something that's really intense, and then you just bury into it. And when I was the first book I ever read, and the only book that I read in high school, the first book that I ever read that did that to me, at least as a teenager, was To Kill a Mockingbird. And I started reading the story, and it's like this, all the injustice. And here's this scout who's like small town South, and I'm small town North, and it seems like she's my best friend. She'll tell me anything. and she's funny. And there's all that, there's the rabid dog, and there was just so much in that book. And I'd be reading it and I think, my God, I just read 25 pages. I never read 25 pages at a time. And it later on, when I started to write, it occurred to me that the same thing would be true if I wrote. If I wrote about something that really mattered to me, that I really cared about, I could get lost in it. And I would get, all of a sudden I'm writing for like 3 hours, which is just unheard of.
Wow.
For me. And I started looking at it, and I thought, I'd written one book that I had, my first book, which was a book called Running Loose. And it was a story about a racial injustice that was a true story that I fictionalized that actually came out of Eastern Washington. And after that, I started working as a abuse and neglect therapist. So when I run into this little girl, and who later, when she was older, came back and said, you can use my story. That's how it got into Whale Talk. And I mean, she did two things. She broke my heart, but she also taught me a whole new thing about heroism. I mean, this kid just kept standing up and standing up and standing up under stuff that would have crushed me. And so I was totally enamored of her survival skills. And some of her survival skills are no fun for teachers, but they are, it was her way to keep herself afloat. And that kind of intensity when I started telling the story. So then I understood that if I told a story that I really cared about, something that really, really moved me, well, number one, injustice did, and abuse did, and, and the kind of, for lack of a better term, heroic stories that I saw kids who'd be completely on the outside at school. The kids are teasing them. They're not liking them. They do screwy things. They're doing whatever they can do to keep going, but nobody knows that. Teachers don't know which kids have that history, and the kids don't either, unless a kid is going to tell. And most kids who are treated really, really badly are not going to say so, because for some reason, this culture, and maybe it's the species, we treat the victim worse than the person who does the abuse. And all of a sudden, for some reason, you have to feel embarrassed that you're the kind of person who gets treated like that.
Right.
Like there's something wrong with you, when in fact, that's not true, but you got to get there. Like, and this little girl, I mean, she thought if she could get the color off, the color for her was awful. As a teenager, she was great, but boy, I mean, she was tougher than nails, but it was because she came through this, through this thing. And it was over and over. I mean, I mean, some of the stories we heard in those days, the abusive stories, I mean, I've written some really rugged ones, but I haven't written the worst ones. So
you shared a lot of those stories in your books.
Yeah, and you have to change them. You can't take a story out of a therapy session, stick it in a book, unless you're a good lawyer and no ethics. But you I mean, you can.
Based on.
It's easy to do. It's based on, and you'll take maybe 2 or 3 kids' experiences and put them in one, in one character. Change the sex, change the race. I mean, there's all you can do with that.
Yeah, ideas from real life.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, you mentioned that you had read To Kill a Mockingbird. What other books were you reading when you were younger?
Well, when I was younger, when I was in that place, I read To Kill a Mockingbird. And then
so is it?
The rest of the things I read were my older brother's book reports, which I recycled.
Oh my.
Scary thing. I told that story. I thought I was safe. I told that story at an Idaho English teachers conference a few years. I thought, my English teacher was pretty old. She's got to be dead by now. So, and I'm talking to the Idaho English Teachers Association. And when I thought she was old, she was like 27 when I was,
right.
when I was a teenager. And she was in the audience, after I told the story, she came down and shook her finger at me and told me, and I said, "I'm a fiction writer, Mrs. Phelps." I'm kidding. But before that, I grew up in a really small town and where there wasn't much going on, but athletics was everything. And I'm talking about the 60s, so it's boys athletics because there weren't any girls athletics. But there were series. There were probably when I was upper elementary and early middle school, a Chip Hilton series that was kind of like Hardy Boys, only sports. And I couldn't get to those fast enough. And I read a lot of Sports Illustrated, and I read, just anything that would just tickle my imagination. And because it was such a sports-oriented town and culture, that was kind of where my interest was. And then, freaky stuff too. I like to get scared, so I'd read.
Oh, scary books.
Yeah, scary books. We didn't have Goosebumps, but as a little kid, I'm sure I would have read Goosebumps all over the place.
Yeah, those are fun ones.
Yeah.
Okay, so are there any other things that you feel like we should know about you or know about your writing?
I was thinking, I was kidding around with somebody the other day, and a thing came up on Facebook to say, things that nobody knows about you, right? And so I started thinking, well, let's see. I had most of my teeth knocked out with a baseball bat from a girl when I was 14.
Oh no, what'd you do?
I was trying to show off, and she was going to bat and I was going to run, and I was showing off to the girl on second base. And when she swung, the coach told me that I had to touch home plate before I went to first. And she was left-handed, so I was standing behind her. And she came around with a bat, and there was a tooth stuck in the bat.
Oh my gosh.
And one went through my lip.
Oh, she really hit you.
That was one. And then, so like I had false teeth for most of my life. That was a good one. I think I'm the only young adult author ever who's performed the Heimlich maneuver on an Alaskan Malamute. successfully.
Well, I don't think, wow.
Not even Gary Paulson.
Wow. Oh, yeah.
And what happened was he was my dog and I was running him, and I would go down to get him, he'd go crazy, and he weighed about 95 or 100 pounds.
Oh yeah, those are big dogs.
Yeah. And he had and I also had a husky, and I would put both of them in a harness, and then I would run with them, and I'd always start uphill because they're side dogs. They can pull you on your face. But he'd just get excited like crazy when I'd show up because he knew he was going to get to go run, and I'd pick up that harness and he'd just be, so I had one of those little bones thing, B-O-N-Z bones, those, and I'd give him the bone so I could get the harness on him. And I gave it to him, and he was doing this thing, and he sucked it right up into his esophagus, and I heard it just plug it. Uh-oh. And I looked down, and his flanks were going back, and he couldn't breathe. And I thought, I used to be a lifeguard, and I thought, if it works on a human, it got to work on a dog. And I got it, and I pumped it. That I didn't get it the first time, and I pumped it harder, and it went about 10 feet. It hit a fence.
Oh my gosh.
And I thought, man, I wish I had that on film.
You saved him.
I would be famous forever. So, and then I saved my cat from a coyote. So if you put those three things together, I might be the only human being in the world
that's ever done them.
Yeah, right.
Oh, that's
in the order. As a writer, I think the thing that I found out for myself that I think is also true for anybody who wants to be a writer. Number one, write all the time. Write anything. If it makes you mad, write it. If it makes you laugh, write it. If it makes you cry, write it. Because that's probably where your stories and even your nonfiction essays are going to come from. Read like crazy, and read a lot of what it is you like to write, because you can see the good stuff and the bad stuff, and always know that the voice that you tell the story in will make that story live or die. I asked my editor one time, I said, because I was doing a thing for Easter, and it was a weekend little class about writing, and somebody asked me, how many pages does an editor read before they decide to keep reading or not? And in those days, there was no internet, so you typed up your manuscript and you sent it out to the editor. And one of the things that I heard authors say they did was they would take page 10 and turn it upside down. So when you got it back, if page 10 was right side up, you knew at least they read 10 pages.
Oh, so you would know how many pages.
Right. At least that they read 10. So I said, I think they read about 10. And then I walked out. We went out for lunch break, and I thought, I just made that up. I don't have any idea. So I called my editor. She's in New York. I called my editor, and I said that they asked me that question. And she said, well, what did you say? And I said about 10. And she's just dead quiet. And she said, try 2.
Oh my gosh. I
said, I'm not telling them that. These people, but what she said was, instantly as an editor, you're not going to get the plot in 2 pages. You're probably not going to get a whole lot of characterization in 2 pages. You're going to get the voice of the storyteller. And she said, immediately if you're in the hands of a storyteller.
Oh, so wow.
You go back and when you're trying to teach people to write, say, get really confident with your storyteller.
And your voice.
Your voice, your main character, the person who's going to narrate that story. Which and when I heard it, I'd already written 4 books, I think, and it terrified me.
Someone who's already done it.
And the other thing I'd say, and this was the thing that would have stopped me, I would say to anybody who wants to write, never let anybody tell you can't do it. People who really care about you will not want you to fail. And so don't try it. And that's the worst advice you could ever get. Your parents will tell you that. People who care about, I remember when I said I wanted to write, my dad said, yeah, but what are you going to do for a living? And it was that, and my mom was like, oh, you're going to be disappointed. Well, yeah. And you hear these stories all the time about, oh, it's hard to get published, all that kind of thing. And it's really hard. Yeah. So building a house is hard. There are a whole bunch of things that are hard. And the people that are good at it are people who kept doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a piece of it that's creative, and there's another piece of it that's like getting the hammer and nails and building the book.
You just didn't quit.
And you got to use the right ones. And there were so many times when I was writing my first book when I just thought, I kept hearing those voices of, who do you think you are? You're too big for your britches. I mean, all this, who cares what you think? All of those things that you hear from people that care about you. Forget that. If you think it's, I tell people, if you think it's hard to get published, if you think it's impossible to get published, go to a bookstore. There are books all over the place. Somebody's getting published. Go to a library. There are books all over the place. A lot of those people are still alive. They're still getting published. Because to get the voice, you have to have confidence. If you're not confident in your voice, in your storyteller's voice, you'll sound like you're working too hard, and the reader will see the writer working too hard rather than the character. Mm-hmm. Like I always say, when people read my books, if a kid picks up my book, or an adult, or whoever picks it up, I don't want them to think I'm Chris Crutcher from the second they open that book. I want them thinking my character, because I'm writing the voice of a 17-year-old kid, and I'm 74. I don't want you knowing that. I want you listening to my kid.
Right. Well, that's really great advice. We have another question. This one's from Katie, and she's wondering if you have any advice for kids and teens right now in our current world, and maybe also parents.
Yeah, I do. And this comes as much from my life as a therapist as it does my life as a writer. Kick back and give yourself a break. I mean, and I don't mean just be lazy, but I mean, this is a time, it's unprecedented. So anything you do is a learning experience. Your thoughts, you're teaching yourself stuff right now. All of a sudden, a lot of the things that you plan to do in any given day, you're not going to get to do. And I'm saying to parents and teachers, I'm saying to adults, man, don't be hard on each other, and don't be hard on kids. I mean, this is one of those times when you can get to know, when adults can get to know kids better than they ever had a chance to get to know them before. And this is a time when you can actually, I mean, we're all kind of hunkered down. This is a time when we get to know each other in ways that we probably wouldn't, and particularly with teenagers, because just developmentally as a teenager, you're supposed to be pushing away from your parents. You're supposed to be, I mean, you're learning socialization, you're doing all these kinds of things. But there are times when you really need somebody older to give you, a little push or some advice about something, or, get a conversation going. And this world, in my lifetime, this world has gotten more and more demanding. It's like when I was a high school kid, I didn't have to tell anybody what I wanted to be. I didn't have to know where I was going to go to college till I was a senior. I didn't have to plan out my life when I didn't even know what was possible. And we've there's so much information, there's so much pressure. And if you're a high functioning academic kid, I got to get looking at colleges by the time I'm a sophomore. I have to be, boy, is this a time to just back off and just take some time, because the colleges don't know what they're going to be doing. Nobody knows. I've got a one stepson teaching at Yale University and the other at Ohio State, and they are sequestered. They don't even know if they're going to start the year.
Yeah.
And that there's a good side to that. And the good side to that is we can all sit back and start to play with creativity. School has gotten to be a memory thing. you know, and instead of a creative thing, we've killed a lot of creativity. And kids, any kid who looks at this has has a creative piece to them. I don't care if they want to be writers or not. There's music, there's sports, there's dance, there's art, every kid has a creative footprint. And now's the time you can go find it. And you can let your imagination take you to the places that, you know, that you maybe were afraid to go.
Yeah.
And you imagine it for a little while and it becomes familiar. And if you can do that, I mean, I have the good fortune of that, having a huge number of published writer friends, fiction writers. And they're all looking at this as amazing story time. I mean, I have the same agency. My agency is Stephen King's agency. So when I want to know, I can't just call Stephen King, but I can call his agent to find out what he's thinking.
Oh.
And he'll tell me, you know, I mean, and then just a whole bunch of other, you know, Laurie Halse Anderson, Judy Blume, you know, I mean, there are a whole bunch, Christopher Paul Curtis. I can go and go and go because I've been at it a long time. And listening to these guys, I mean, we get back and forth and we're talking because the publishing industry doesn't know what it's doing either. But we're talking about all of a sudden, because we have all this time, imagining writing very different stories than we've written before. You know, moving into other genres, things like that. Well, kids are in even a bigger place because, I mean, if you're a teenager, everything's in front of you right now. And if you're a parent or if you're a teacher, this is one of the best times in the world to get to know your kid. You know, I mean, I remember those times when, you know, I couldn't figure out what my dad was thinking, and he wasn't a guy that was likely to tell you unless you had, you know, he had a wholesale gas business, and we'd get on the truck, and when you're riding a long distance on the truck, none of the do but start talking.
Yeah, that was the time.
Room, stuck out in the yard, nothing to do but start talking.
That's great. We have one more question.
Okay.
This one's from Eva. If someone has never read one of your books, which one do you think would be a good one to start with?
It depends on the age. I think if you're, I think the sure hits, I would say Whale Talk, Staying Fat for Sarah Burns, Deadline, and probably Iron Man are sure hits. Running Loose or Stoughton for younger kids, maybe I'm talking freshman or 8th grade. The Sledding Hill is big with a little bit younger kids. So those would be the place to start, because basically if you read those books, you know me. I mean, thematically they blend, and they're pretty fast moving. So I mean, those would be places to start. You got to be ready for a little bit of a rough ride. I try to be as funny as I am tragic, but it's quite a balancing act.
Okay, well, great. I think that we're going to finish up the video here now, but I want to say thank you for spending this time with us. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thank you. It's been great for me too. And I love to do libraries because it's where all the good stories are.
Yeah. All right. Thanks again, Chris.
You're welcome. Take care.
Bye, everyone. Yeah, you too.